Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Olmo with Key Performance Ideas, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar, Oracle Data Integrator 12c, Tips and Techniques to Import and Exporting ODI Objects. Today's webinar will be presented by Jayjay Gutierrez. Jayjay Gutierrez is a Hyperion Planning and S-Space certified consultant that specializes in design, development, implementation, and administration of EPM solutions focused around budgeting, forecasting, and reporting. His experience extends not only into development of EPM software, but also the practical finance and accounting processes that drive technology. Thank you, JJ, for joining us today.
Thanks, Greg. In today's presentation, we're going to be reviewing what is Oracle Data Integrator. And so Oracle Data Integrator is the best-of-breed data integration platform. So it's a high-performing data integration platform that is created by Oracle, and it's actually Oracle's strategic product in integrating different data items and data platforms. And so today, in today's presentation, I'm going to be going over some new features in ODI 12c, and then also giving you guys tips and tricks on how to import and export objects both from 12c and 11g as well. So we're going to be showing you different ways for both 11 and 12. And then also I'm going to give you guys some real-world examples as far as situations that I've seen from different clients, like they are in different requests that I've received, and kind of how I've tackled those requests, especially focusing on importing and exporting of ODI objects. And so just to kind of go over the agenda today, we're going to be talking about high-level overview of what ODI does, how ODI fits in the EPM world, and then we'll get into ODI 12c by talking about some new features that I feel are key in terms of deciding whether to upgrade to 12c, or if you're already on 12c, whether maybe you'll learn some new tips and tricks that you didn't know before. And then we'll be talking about code migration and backups. So different situations that I face in where I've had requests to back up the system, have scheduled backups, and then also being able to have the ability to migrate code from different environments. So I'll talk about different requirements that I've seen. And then also, and then here we'll be talking about 3 different exporting and importing techniques. So just specifically exporting and importing individual objects, using the Smart Export functionality, and then also creating a custom ODI package. So this is a little bit of development work, but I'm going to go through the development work here and how you would create a custom package to query the repository and export items individually. And then I'll come back and talk through the different scenarios and requirements that we face, and then how each one of these exporting and importing techniques have tackled those requirements. And so ODI is Oracle's ETL strategic tool. So this is a tool that they're going to be using moving forward. Oracle's investing in ODI, and so from a data integration standpoint, it is second to none. It integrates to most anything Oracle with built-in knowledge modules. And so specifically from a EPM standpoint, you can load, extract metadata from on-premise planning and S-Space. And some of the key features that I feel that are the strong points of ODI are that it contains a lot of knowledge, or it has this concept of knowledge modules. And so what knowledge modules are basically ways to export or ways to source data and also target data based on what type of data source or data target you need. And so the ODI comes with out-of-the-box knowledge modules, which will, for example, load a flat file into, let's say, an Oracle repository, or load a flat file into a Hyperion planning application. And so those are pre-built modules. There are also modules that you can customize. And so it also supports third-party sources. So even if you're using non-Oracle data sources and targets, it will integrate with those. And it also actually in 12c has come up with a simplified designer interface or user interface. And so this simplified interface really just simplifies kind of your code and your ETL logic. And so this allows both business users and developers to kind of understand the code and the transformations that are happening. Some other key functionality is recently you have REST API connectivity. So you can use some Jython to connect to the REST API. This is big, especially now with a lot of the cloud implementations. They're using the REST API. And so you can kind of connect ODI to your cloud instance to, let's say, extract or load data and metadata. And also it's a service-oriented architecture. So you can also pull data from services or web services, or send requests and receive responses from web services as well. So ODI is a really powerful tool in terms of data integration, and one of the best tools out there for data integration specifically. So how does, to give you guys a real world example of kind of how it would fit in the ODI fits in the EPM world, here you can kind of see in the middle here we have ODI. ODI is basically taking data from multiple sources, in this case, an HR system, a recruiting system, a GL system, and a data warehouse. And so we're sourcing from these different systems. ODI is pulling that information. And then in ODI, there's transformations happening. And in this case, we're loading them to Hyperion Planning application, and eventually into an S-based queue. So you can see here, ODI is pulling data from multiple sources and loading them into multiple sources as well. And so this is a pretty powerful tool in terms of loading things in parallel, or extracting things and loading things in parallel. So you can kind of get the performance you need, as well as it can actually handle a lot of complex logic that's embedded in a lot of the data integrations that I've seen. So just to review really quick what ODI is, it's a high-performing ETL tool. So it can scale to both your existing sources and targets. It's Oracle's strategic tool for data integration in the future, so they're going to be constantly updating it and adding new sources. It has the ability to be customized, so you can customize your own knowledge modules if there isn't one out there for you. So you can basically connect it to anything that you can code for. And then also, there's a lot of built-in functionality for Hyperion Planning and for S-Base. And then it can also perform things outside of data integration as well, because you can package things up, such as writing your own batch scripts, sending out emails from ODI. So I've had clients use ODI as their scheduling tool. You can run S-Base calculations, and you can run S-Base or some scripts directly through the ODI interface through the knowledge modules. And so it does a lot of stuff outside of ETL, or outside of the data integration aspect as well, and can be used to schedule and standardize a lot of the tasks that you need to run on a daily basis. So as far as what's new in ODI 12c, I just kind of wanted to talk through some ODI 12c features. So ODI 12c has been out for a little bit now, and so they've been constantly updating 12c. But I do see a lot of 11G instances out there. And so if you're looking to update to 12C, there are a lot of new features out there. And if you're using 12C already, these are some things you might not know about. So the interface itself is different. They've updated the UI to look more standard with a lot of the other Oracle tools. So they've improved performance by actually allowing you to load to multiple targets at the same time. And so no longer do you have to run multiple interfaces to load into targets separately. You can create one mapping and load into multiple targets. And that's another key thing that's changed. So in 12C, we've replaced interfaces with mappings. I think it's just from a terminology standpoint, a lot of everything that you can do in interfaces you can do in a mapping. So it's basically just interfaces are being replaced with mappings. Another nice feature they've added is reusable mappings. And so with reusable mappings, if you have this, let's say the same data integration, but you need to use it in multiple spots and multiple projects, you can now set that reuse mapping as a global object, and this object can be used across multiple projects. The procedure interface has also been updated. One of the difficulties in using procedures in 11G was as you added multiple steps into each procedure, you had to view each step, you had to double click into each line, and then it would open up that particular code, but then you would lose visibility into the rest, into the other lines of code that you've added. And so 12c has kind of fixed that view, and so you can kind of both see all of the lines that are happening in your procedure, as well as edit any line at the same time. So there's no longer this in and out. That was really kind of more of an annoying thing to use in 11G. They've also added in 12c a step-by-step debugger. So this really helps in terms of debugging your data integrations. So let's say you have a lot of transformation going on. You can definitely add a lot of debugging functionality. So to check the value of your data integration throughout each step, you can put in some stops and some watches, just like any other debugger. So this is a kind of a big improvement because you can instead of just running your package and waiting for some of the more cryptic errors that ODI generates sometimes, you can debug your code, step through it, and then identify directly where your errors or your issues are happening. They've added XML improvements, and so they've added some more functionality from an XML technology standpoint. So just kind of a lot, just improving again the connectivity and the source side of the ODI framework. And then they've also added web logic management. And so for your EPM folks out there who are already using web logic, so ODI can leverage web logic as well. So you have one standard management framework. And then for me, a key update is the use of GUID IDs. And so if anyone's tried to ever actually import and export out of 11G and 10G, there's a lot of issues using the repository IDs, and them stepping on each other. So there's a lot of uniqueness issues. Well, in 12C, a lot of that goes away because they're using GUID IDs, and now you're going to get a unique ID for each object, and importing and exporting should be a lot simpler now in terms of just getting your code from one, let's say, server to another. All right, so now that I talked about a little bit about 12C, I want to talk about different scenarios and different requirements that I've seen as far as exporting and importing data. And so a lot of the times people ask, can I schedule a backup of my ODI code in Designer? The goal here is just to get a good copy or get a good backup of all of the objects individually in Designer. So you can also back up the repository, but that's kind of that's more of a global step. Here we're looking to schedule backups for individual code pieces. And then so another requirement I've asked is, can you export all of the objects related to a particular project? And so this is just if you want to back up one project, and let's say you're sharing the environment with other folks, I just want to back up my piece of the ODI environment and not necessarily everyone else's project. So we'll talk through that. And then also the ability to export objects individually. And so this is key. So if you wanted to get an export or a copy of every object in ODI, this will give you the ability to check in and check out those objects after you've exported them. And so this is more for, let's say you wanted to use a code management system outside of ODI, and you wanted to check it into, let's say something like TFS. You can export all of the objects out of ODI, check them into your code management system, and then as you make updates or make changes, or as you update what's actually in production, you can check in and check out those code pieces outside of ODI. So I'm going to talk through different ways to export objects individually, and then if you wanted, and then the simple ad hoc export. So if you wanted to export one object individually, let's say you wanted to save as before you made any changes. I'll talk through different ways of exporting objects from a one-off standpoint. And so I've seen three key techniques that will help everyone import and export objects. And so these three techniques basically will encompass most of the different ways that you can export ODI objects. There are different ways to, let's say, back up the system from a repository standpoint, but today I'm just going to be focusing on individual objects within the designer. And so exporting individual ODI designer objects. And so ODI has some built-in functionality. So you can see here, there's different ways to export data. So here I'm going to be talking about your exporting multiple objects. The nice thing here is that you can export more than one object at the same time. And then you can also, when you run this multiple export, you just drag and drop the objects from the designer pane into the export screen. A lot of this can be grouped into a zip file. And so once you've selected all your objects, you can zip them up together. And then also, the nice part is that if you want to repeat, let's say, this set of objects, you can save the list of objects you've exported. Now, the tough part here, if you're going to export objects individually, when you import them, you have to be wary of the order that you import them, because this assumes that you know exactly which order you need to update your objects so that they work correctly. So just to keep in mind, when you export items and when you need to import them back, I always kind of look at it from a bottoms-up perspective. So make sure you import the topologies first, then the models, then global objects, variables, and then procedures, and then project objects like interfaces or mappings, and then packages themselves. So just be aware of that when you're exporting things individually, because ODI assumes that you're aware of the order that you need to import them back into the system. And so just talking through the export steps, they're pretty self-explanatory. Like I said, it's a simple right-click on the top and then selecting your export type. You can drag and drop your objects into the window, and then you select your directory, and then you export it as a zip. I always recommend doing that just in case you have some larger objects. And then you don't necessarily need to save the list of objects if this is maybe a one-time thing, but if you this is going to be, let's say you're working on a specific project, and you want to just continually make backups, daily backups of what you're working on, you can save the list of objects. Okay, so talked about exporting the objects. Now to import them back in, again, this assumes that you know exactly what object you've exported and then where you need to import it back. And so, for example, if you're going to import, let's say, an interface or a mapping, you need to be in the mapping or interface area of the designer and then right-click in that area. So let's say so if I wanted to import a mapping back in, I would right-click on the mapping. It would say import, select import, and then so you would import the mapping. And you'd go down to your directory or the zip that you saved your export in, and then you would simply import the object. It will tell you, it'll give you some confirmation as far as what type of any errors you've had. One thing to keep in mind is when selecting the import type, I found that the type is key in that you've got different modes. So you've got duplication. So this is basically if you're going to create anything new. Let's say you're migrating to a new environment, or you want to just say create a new copy or something, you would use duplication. Insert mode. So this basically is just inserting the object into the repository. So if there is a new object, or if there isn't an object there, it will insert the object for you. Update mode. So this will just update the existing object. This is basically an overwrite. And so this will just overwrite what you already have in there. And then insert update mode is basically will update or insert the object. So you really want to get it in there. I would not recommend this if you're exporting a lot of child components. This is a good area to keep in mind that a lot of this stuff is in the documentation, but I've used ODI for a while now, and it's nice to have it spelled out in some in an easy to use fashion. So for the most part, I use either the update or the insert mode to get objects into to import objects into ODI. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about here is our smart exports and imports. And so smart export and smart import was released in, I believe, 11.1.116. And so the nice thing here is it takes the guesswork out of the dependencies, and it will actually go through and identify all the dependencies and all of the objects that are necessary, the children underneath each object, and identify them for you through wizard process. So, for example, you're going to pull up the Smart Export screen, and then you're just going to select Smart Export. So let's say you want to drag and drop an entire project and save every object related to that project. So after selecting Smart Export, you would then drag and drop that project into the Smart Export window. You will see on the log screen underneath, it's actually going to start adding multiple objects into the export process. So you're going to see objects from the designer. You're going to see objects from models. So any model associated with your project is going to be exported, and then any of the topology, so a context, logical schema, physical architecture, all of that associated with your project will be exported. So that's really nice. I mean, this is all going to be contained in a single file. So you can basically just label this my project export, and you'll get all of the relevant objects for that project into a single file. All right, so in order to import it, importing a smart import is really easy as well, since you really don't have to be in the specific object that you need to import. You can just be in the general designer screen. You can drop down and select import, and then you just have to find your file. And then once you walk through and select your export file, it's going to walk you through and identify all of the objects that you're going to import from that file. And then it'll identify issues for you. So if there's any conflicts, it will identify it for you, and then it will try to give you a resolution. And then it will also give you the ability to overwrite, to change, or to create new. So you have a lot of different options with a smart import. The nice thing is everything is going to be in a single file. It's going to take the guesswork out of just what order do I have to import things in. Smart import will import things in the appropriate order, and it will actually alert you if you have any issues with conflicts with the import itself. So it does a lot of the work. And it does a lot of guesswork. It takes a lot of guesswork out of importing and exporting into ODI. So I really recommend using the Smart Export. And then so here again, I have some tips and tricks in terms of the import type. All right, so the merge, like it says, is going to just merge the items that you already have in there. So if you have anything, if you have items in there, they'll just get merged. So this is I would watch out in terms of using merge. Typically, I use overwrite. So this will just overwrite the object that you have in there, because you don't want to, let's say, have multiple copies. You just want to have, I know what I'm importing, and I want to import, everything that I have in my Smart Export file. So I typically use overwrite a lot of the time. Create copy would be, you would use that if you were creating, let's say, migrating to a new environment. You can create a new copy since you don't have that copy there already. And then reserve and ignore. Basically, these are just more related to ignoring the objects because let's say you don't want to import the context again because it's already there and you don't need to import it again. Or same thing with like logical schemas. Let's say you already have it there and you've already imported it. You're not making any changes. You just want to ignore it for now because you're importing other items. And so that's the key thing to note with the Smart Import and Smart Export. Because it's packaging things into one big export, you just have to be aware that you could have the potential to overwrite multiple items because you're getting everything in one big shot. So another way to import and export items is to create a custom package. So key here when you're creating a custom package is you kind of have to have some working knowledge of how the ODI data repository structures work. Another thing you're going to need access to is a relational table or a relational database so you can temporarily store some information. The nice thing about creating a custom package is that you can basically drive where you want to save your export, how you want your exports to be organized. And so if you wanted to have your mappings or you wanted to organize things by object type, so you can have a project folder, and then underneath that project folder, you can have mapping. You can have your interfaces, you can have your procedures, you can have your variables, and then you can have your models and anything else associated with that project in kind of any fashion you want or any folder structure you want. So another thing, you could actually package up, or once you create your package, you can create your scenarios, and then you can schedule these things to run, let's say, nightly. So if you wanted to have a backup of every single object, and then you wanted to, let's say, have a file for every one of those objects, you can schedule a backup of your custom package, or you can schedule your custom package, and it will run every night and basically back up your system individually. So one of the other things to be aware of on the import side is that since we're backing up objects individually and querying the repository to export the objects, when you import them back into the system, you have to be aware of the order that they're being imported or that you need to import them. So again, it's to make sure that you're aware of the topologies, the models, the procedures, and then the project objects. Kind of like how you would manually import things. And so here, just kind of walking through a little bit of the complexity in creating your own custom ODI backup package. One of the first things you would need to do is have access to some type of relational database where you can store a couple different items. I think the main items you're going to need are the object name, so the name of the object, so let's say it's a particular mapping, my mapping. The global ID, so this is an ID assigned in the relational database by Oracle or by ODI, and then the project folder. So this will be good so that you can reference or you can create a project folder for each object name, and then kind of organize it kind of as you will. And so we would create a temporary table that would house all of these objects. And then so as we go through the steps, basically, what we're going to do is we're going to create a temporary table. We're going to query the ODI repository. And so once you're querying the repository, you're going to write a query to, let's say, pull all of the mappings out from a particular project folder. And so this is where knowledge of the repository is key. There's some good documentation out there as far as the ODI backend repositories, and kind of some of the examples are this SNP mapping table or the SNP interface table. They hold your interfaces or your mappings, and so basically you want to get your object name and the global ID out from each one of these tables. We're then going to just kind of count. So let's say we have 5 different objects that we're going to export. we're gonna create a variable to count the objects, and then as we go through the export process, the key thing here is we're going to be using the ODI export object functionality within the package section of ODI. And so when you use the ODI export object, all you really need are basically an object name, the global ID that you're going to export, and then the type of file that you're going to export. So here, the class name. So if I'm going to export, let's say, a mapping, I need to use SMP mapping as my class name. So there's going to be a section in the ODI export screen where you're going to need to populate the class name. And so depending on the object you want to export, you're going to hard code this into your export ODI step. And so here I've extracted some of the key ones that I've used out of the ODI documentation. For the most part, you can export any type of item that you want, and so the documentation kind of walks you through all the different types of items. But here are the main ones that I've seen. So the interface, the mappings, the models, the packages, the projects, the technologies, that type of information. And so you can see right here, we're going to walk through basically refreshing variables, and then we're going to go through, again, like I said, the ODI export object is the key here. So we're going to identify an object to export. We're going to create variables to identify which object we're going to export. And then we're going to run the ODI export object. And then once that object's been exported, again, we're going to kind of loop through the table and make sure that the last object we process gets deleted, and then we're going to come back and say, all right, are there any more objects to export? So let's say like I said earlier, we're going to do this for 5 objects. And so it will go through the next one and then kind of keep exporting the objects individually. From a performance standpoint, I've seen this run pretty efficiently. I mean, it took maybe like a few minutes to export a few hundred objects and organize them by folder. And so this thing can be optimized definitely as far as what your exact requirements are. But just wanted to show an example of a custom export. So with querying the ODI repositories. And then once you export them, again, the import functionality is similar to how we were importing and exporting from multiple object standpoint. So it's the same process. You need to, so if you're going to import a topology, let's say, you need to be in the topology section. If you're going to import a mapping or interface, you need to be in the mapping or interface section, and then right-click and then import that object. So this is, again, understanding what you need to import, and then the order here matters for your import since you've manually kind of created an extract for each one of the objects in ODI. And so just kind of talking through different examples that are requirements that we explained in the beginning here. So scheduling a backup of ODI code in Designer. I think if you really wanted to do that, the best way to do that would be creating a custom package, because you can identify exactly which objects you want to export. You're able to create and schedule this backup. Smart export and exporting individual objects, that's a little bit more difficult to schedule and to batch up together. All right, so the next thing here is export of all objects related to a project. And so you can definitely export each object individually by selecting the object that you want to export. So you can drag and drop each object. So the export import module of multiple objects works fine. Smart export works as well. So you can drop down on a project or drop down on a set of projects, put them into the smart export wizard, and it will export each one of those objects. Now the difference here is that it'll all be in a single file, whereas in the export multiple objects, they'll have individual files. But you can do the same thing as well on the custom package side. You can export objects individually from a custom package standpoint. You'll get a file for each object that you export. But again, you're gonna have to import them and kind of understand the order that you need to import them. Here's the third thing. Here is the ability to export all objects and check into a code library. I think the best way to do that would be to create a custom package, because you can export all of the objects that you need to export and have an individual file for each one of them. And then you can use it. Then once you get an individual file for each one of them, you can check that into your code management system, and then start the process from there of branching out and using a code management system outside of ODI. And then the final thing here, if you wanted to do an ad hoc export, a one-off export, let's say, exporting and importing multiple objects, that obviously works because you can select objects individually. A smart export works because you can select the individual object and just smart export one object at a time. The custom package would be obviously a little bit more overkill if you're just trying to do let's say a save as or an ad hoc export for your development purposes. So that kind of concludes my talk today for ODI.
Thank you, JJ, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar, Oracle Data Integrator 12c, Tips and Techniques to Import and Exporting ODI Objects. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call us. JJ's and my contact information are displayed on your screen. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar, and have a great afternoon.